Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second live Q&A for the Beneath the Surface group. So for those of you that are just joining this broadcast, Mariah is a book cover designer for the indie market. She has a background in advertising, in marketing, and graphic design. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that we're going to try to discuss today. And the first question that I wanted to ask Mariah is if you could give us some background on your graphic design career and what brought you to where you are today.
So I started in high school, which is the early 90s, working in a print shop. And I was editor of my yearbook, and I lived in Southern California, and our advisor was an art center graduate and worked for Disney part-time. So I kind of got thrown into the world organically.
Okay.
And I'm very thankful I did in high school because I kind of had a game plan at that point.
Yeah.
And then my whole goal was to become an art director of a magazine. I loved publication design, specifically periodicals and magazines. And by the time I was 28, that happened.
Really?
And I did that for a few years. It was a small magazine.
Okay.
It wasn't like
still.
but it was like I did feel a sense of attainment.
Mm-hmm.
And being stupid, and in my 20s, I was like, well, I did that. Maybe I should have another career now.
I achieved that goal. Move on.
Big mistake. I don't know if there's anyone young listening to this. Don't do that. Like, just hold on. Mm-hmm. Find a good hobby. Like, don't. If it's paying your bills, stick with it. So I ended up doing a bunch of other careers for 10 years. I worked for a culinary school. I helped create a career assessment tool. I became a hypnotherapist. Wow. And then I went into digital marketing. So I kind of gave up all of graphic design for almost 10 years.
Really?
Really.
And it just kept calling to you?
It didn't call to me until really the last 3 years. I think I was really burned out after, the 20s, like really working hard during my 20s, and the industry changed a lot. So right around 2000, which was when I started to leave it, people were expecting way too much of their designers. You had to suddenly be a website designer. You had to do, and I'll be honest with you, at the time, website design just messed with my little creative brain in a way that was not workable.
Okay.
It's like, if this is the way the industry's going, I'm out. Like, I can't compete with these guys that went to technical schools and know how to code and be a designer. Like, I can't do that. So that was also kind of informed my decision to find another career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So fast forward to 3 years ago, I'd been a marketer for a while and I liked it. And I ended up spending some time with my parents, and they're retired and they're part of photo groups. So I'm actually applying this into photography. Mm-hmm. They have, retired people love picking up photography as their hobby. Mm-hmm. And so I went to a lot of their photo meetings, and they found out I knew how to use Photoshop. And so they asked me to teach them some classes.
Okay.
Like having fun with Photoshop. They do these tutorials that would spend an hour on how to mask. And I'm like, that's not what they want to do. They want to have fun. They want to play with their photos. So I just taught some classes, and I got rehooked. Like that.
That's so funny, because there's that horrible quote out there that says, people who can't do teach. But I find that teaching is such a great way to deepen your knowledge and to find more passion about something.
Absolutely. So that happened about 3 years ago. Totally re-sparked my love of creativity. It was really, digital art was just a hobby at that point. I was like, great, I found a hobby now. And then I just was like, I really like this. Can I make money at it?
Mm-hmm. That's the question we all ask ourselves. I love this. How do I make this my life?
Right. And this is where the marketing comes in. And, you can ask me another question. I'm sorry. I've got off the rails.
No, because I have a background as a marketer too. So there's a lot of juicy stuff we could ask each other, but we might bore people. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, if
I could nerd out about marketing. Yeah.
You geek out on it in a way like no other.
Yeah.
It's
weird.
Yeah. So I put my market research head on can I make a career of this? And in my research, I discovered, and this was a couple of years ago, I'm sure the number has gone up, 3,000 to 5,000 books are published every day on Amazon.
Every day. Wow.
And that's an old stat. They changed it. You used to be able to figure out that stat when you looked under new releases, and it would show you how many releases there were in 30 days. Well, simple math, right? You have 200,000 whatever, divide by 30. That's the average.
Yeah.
They moved that number, so I don't have an accurate one. I can only assume in 2 years it's gone up.
Yeah.
I mean, the trend was always going up. And even if it went down, 3,000 to 5,000 books a day?
It's a huge market. It's amazing. Yeah.
So it was like, when I first started the research, I saw all these independent designers and I was like, oh, it's crowded. And I saw that number. I was like, oh no, it's not crowded. I need like 10 to 20 gigs a month to easily pay my bills easily. I can find 10 to 20 book covers to design a month.
Wow. Yeah. So I think this is where a lot of us as fine artists get stuck. It's doing market research, understanding how a business would work, how it would pay our bills, and really looking for that supply and demand piece, and I think that that's what really fascinated me about your background is being a marketer, working in advertising. Those are like, you crunch numbers like that all of the time. And it becomes harder when you're thinking about fine art and selling prints. To really understand, well, where is that demand and how do you create that supply? So I'm curious to know, just from a little bit of your business background, what did you do to start finding clients?
The very first thing I did, I'm in a predominantly retirement community. I live in Arizona. And there's a lot of retired people here.
Yes. For anybody that doesn't know, I used to live in Arizona. There are entire cities dedicated to retirement. There's like Sun City and Sun City West, and it is a huge place for people to retire because it doesn't get cold.
It doesn't get cold, and we also have to look at just the trends. Baby boomers are retiring right now. I just read it's like 11,000 a day. So like crazy numbers. Obviously, I like numbers occasionally as I'm like just throwing out these.
Yeah, I like the stats. This is very informative.
But so I live in Arizona in a community that's mixed, but there's a lot of retired people here. Well, retired people like writing books. They like photography. So there's a very active writers association here. So the first thing I did was see if I could schedule a talk about book cover design with them. So smart. Yeah. And that was really, I say that talk, which happened January 2017, was truly the beginning of my business. I had done research for probably the 6 months before. I was on 99 Designs, which is a spec work site, which I would not recommend for most people because I wasn't sure if I wanted this as a career and I really wanted to talk to authors and kind of see where their pain points were. It was a good place for me. It was like, I used it for a few months, but spec work, there's a lot of ethical concerns with spec work. And for those who don't know, spec work is when 99 Designs is a contest site. So an author puts up a brief, 100 people create a cover, they pick a cover, that one person gets paid. No one else.
It's the same thing for a lot of these apps that are out there for stock photography. And Image Brief used to have a model like that too. So on one hand, it was nice for people who were trying to learn about the market to understand what is the demand out there. But at the same time, Coca-Cola could come in and say, we want you to submit your best photographs and the best one will get picked. Well, it means that thousands of people suddenly were working for free to pitch an idea to Coca-Cola. So that is definitely that ethical issue. A lot of photographers would get pissed. I think that honestly, there was a contest going around very recently about that. So yeah, I mean, that being said, again, these are great research tools for people. So there's apps out there. Snapwire is an app that you can submit photos to different missions. Most of them have a model like this built in. And again, on one hand, you could get your images seen by the right people. On the other hand, and all stock photography is sort of working on spec. So for those of you that want a career in stock photography, you're creating, hoping to meet a market demand. That's a tough thing. So Yeah, I think in the 99 Designs situation, it definitely creates, or the Coca-Cola situation, it creates more of that ethical gray area for us.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
never even thought of stock photography being spec work, and it is. Like
it
now
is.
that you outlined it, I was like, oh, right.
Yeah,
I'm part
yeah.
of the problem.
No, no. I mean, there is definitely viable careers to be had, but I think that the ethical issue is when companies come in and they try to work that system in their favor. By the way, I just want to say hi to everybody that's popped in. Sarah and Scott and Christina and Danielle and Bill. Hello, if you're still with us. Sorry about the technical issues earlier. Thank you so much for finding us back in all of the discussion going on. So we touched on this very briefly, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how working at these advertising agencies as a designer and a digital marketer helped inform basically like your style. And then again, like I think to some degree, it's probably helped inform your ability to do this market research. But can you just touch on that a little more for us?
I think I've thought of these questions before, and now I'm like changing my answer. So I do refer to myself as an artist limitedly. I prefer more of a designer.
Okay.
And the reason is because I see artists as being a full spectrum of fine art, commercial art, and I'm like commercial. Like this is to be sold, and the product I'm making is to get others to buy, right? So I'm creating packaging, book covers, packaging, and it's very much market driven. So I think having a marketing background makes me less sensitive as a creative. If that makes sense, right?
It totally makes sense.
This isn't my art, and I'm going to put an asterisk on that for a second. When I'm working custom with a client one-on-one, it's not mine.
Yeah.
Like I hope I end up with something I can put in my portfolio. Authors sometimes make horrible design decisions, and they're paying the bill. So I give it to them. Sometimes, I mean, I will talk to them about it, but at the end of the line, I'll do what they want.
Yeah.
You know? I may tell them why something may not work for them the best way.
Right.
But I'm not sensitive about it. Now I do have my pre-made business, right? And so pre-mades, just for people who don't know, and I didn't realize this whole market existed until I became a designer and got involved with indie authors. Pre-mades are generally less expensive than customs. It's completely the designer's vision, and I just substitute your title in there. So I only sell it once. It's not like I'm selling the same book cover multiple times. I only sell a vision once, and authors buy it. And for me, like it's about a quarter to a third of the price of my custom prices. So it's a great deal for someone to get something professional. I recently made the decision, I won't do any changes on my pre-mades to the art.
That's smart.
Yeah. One, it can be a rabbit hole, but two, that's my vision as an artist.
Right.
Like I've decided I have to make so many compromises with custom work. I've decided like, nope, if it fits your book and you buy it, great. If it doesn't, maybe something else will. You know, like I've just decided like, that's my vision. I'm not messing with it.
I love hearing about the business side of various artists because again, I think that like when we go into art, we don't think about business structure like that, like how many revisions in a contract and things like that. And, you know, both of us having come from agency life, again, I feel like we could just get coffee and talk all about that. But you really learn about kind of how to be a hard ass about stuff like that and to separate that personal piece. Like I've been going through so much rejection lately, uploading images to a stock site. And there's that little artist in me that's like, why are you doing this? And then there's that marketer side of me that's like, okay, next, next shoot, upload it to the next site, because it is, it is my vision and it is my art to some degree, but it is commercial. Like when I create art for myself, then I'll submit it as well. And if it gets rejected, it hurts a lot more. But most of the stuff that I'm creating for stock sites, it's because I know that there's commercial value to it.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that learning it's a little bit of a callousness almost that we have to develop, that thicker skin that exists in the business mind, not necessarily in the artist's mind. And I think for our mental safety, it's helpful to split them a little bit, not have split personalities, but create separation and space for those two sides of our brain to exist.
Yeah, definitely. And, I had an interesting experience. So I have some of that callousness with my book covers, right? Mm-hmm. But I entered a digital piece into an art show recently, and it's completely just of my brain. Like it's surrealism, stuff I can't get away with in commercial work, right? Like there's birds inside of bubbles and stuff. It's just weird. Like I get that it's weird. And it got accepted to the show. Well, a woman approached me and she's like, "Oh, is this your piece?" She's like, "I've been looking at it forever and I just can't connect with it."
Yeah.
I wanted to die. Now I hear rejection all the time, and I hear like, "Can you change this?" and everything on my professional side, and I've gotten used to it. But having my first public comment about my first piece in a gallery, and I swear I wanted to cry right there. I was like, "That's it. I'm going back to business. I can do business stuff. Fine art. Whew, that hurts."
It does. It really hurts. Yeah. Somebody just said they had to drop. I'm trying to check to see your name on my phone over here. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us. The name's not coming up, but if anybody has to drop by, thank you so much for being here. Yes, sorry to segue, but definitely having people come up. I remember a former coworker at my agency found my photography site and looked at my fine art images, and he goes, "Why would you ever create something like this?" Because my work's a little dark, And I was like, okay, let me just crawl into a hole right now. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It hurts.
It does. Yeah. But I think it's important, if you want to make money from your art, from your creativity, I'm not even going to say from your art, but from some sort of creative expression, it's good to get some boundaries. It's good to realize it is a product.
Yeah, it is.
A product.
Yeah. By the way, Sarah says that she loves the idea of pre-mades. As a designer and photographer, this is something she's going to consider. And she says, agreed, fine art is tough. Yes, it is still a product. It's so much closer to our hearts. That's what makes it difficult. It's very difficult to separate. And, the discussion that we had with Samantha last week, and we're going to be talking to Alyssa next week, is going to be all about juried shows, which is kind of what you're touching on. There is inherent rejection associated with those too. And oh my gosh, it'll beat you down if you let it. I know that I tried to get into a magazine for years, like 7 or 8 years. And I finally got an image in, but it was an image that was taken like 5 years ago. I think I'd submitted it multiple times. And so I was kind of like, finally, yes. And also, so you have to
like new stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like overcoming rejection, but then at the same time it was like, but I haven't been validated. So there's that ongoing pressure that we create for ourselves because again, our heart is so tied up into it. So you had touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of teaching, but how can you talk about just that first moment that you created a book cover? And I'm going to check the questions again. Sure.
So we're going to actually go back in time. I worked in ad agencies back in the early 2000s before I got the Art Director magazine job. And I was in a small town, and an ad agency in a small town does pretty much everything.
Yes.
The book cover design came in. So actually my very first book cover was 2001. This is before Amazon took over. This is before ebooks, before Kindle. Kindle is a huge, if we were to do the history of self-publishing, book publishing, all of it, Kindle is like this huge thing in the timeline that changed everything. So this is before that. This is when if someone wanted to self-publish, they had to finance printing 3,000 copies and pray that independent bookstores would carry it.
Wow.
Independent bookstores. That's something else that existed in 2000 that doesn't exist as much now.
We have a few of them in my town, but I feel like they're on the upswing though. I don't want to go to Barnes & Noble anymore. Right. I think that the 90s are starting to fade away.
They are.
Heather asked.
My very first book cover. You can actually see it on Amazon. Really? Keep in mind, This was done in 2000. A lot of things in design have changed. It was also
Technology has changed.
and how you sell. So now you're selling thumbnails, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was a book that was on a bookshelf. So the proportions are radically different than what I would do for a book cover now. Like, and you'll see it. I'll tell you what it is. And when you see where the main character is, you may not even see the main character on the book cover because it's so small. It's called Channeling Biker Bob. And it's a metaphysical
Channeling
Biker Bob. And it's a, I don't think he used the digital image itself to upload onto Amazon. I think
I see it.
a picture of it because it's not even as clear as the original.
Mm-hmm.
There is a biker on that cover, which you may not see. Very small. Very small. And the author actually brought in pictures. Like I put those together. He brought in snapshots.
Okay.
Probably a really good thing that bike's really small because you have to work so much with legalities that I didn't know about in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So if that was a recognizable bike, that actually would have been a huge problem for licensing.
Yes.
So,
yep.
You know, I guess it was an advantage that I did such a small design because you can't tell what kind of bike that was.
Right. Yeah. So for anybody that's wondering, anything that is super recognizable in terms of design. So obviously, like you have to Photoshop logos out and whatnot. But if there was a Harley design that was just iconic, you would not be able to utilize it in an image that you are licensing because unless somehow you got the legal rights to do so from Harley Davidson, you would be utilizing their intellectual property. Now, if it was a more generic bike, that would be no problem.
Yeah.
So those are things that we have to think about. Like, let's say if you were shooting a model with a Louis Vuitton bag and they have like that very iconic tote bag, you could not use it in that image and then license that image. So something to think about. Heather has a question. First, she says hello, and then she says, if someone wanted to learn on their own, are there free templates out there to create covers, or do you start from scratch? And she also says, boy, I understand rejection.
They're not, I think there might be. I don't. I create from scratch. So, you know, I've got 25 years of design experience. So I know where my proportions are and stuff and what I'm looking for. The rule of thirds is generally a good guideline with book cover design. I try to use different rules just because that one gets super boring. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing it, you know, have the eyes on the top line or you know, your rule of thirds. So if you're very new to graphic design, study the rule of thirds and start looking at that. A lot of authors are very concerned about titles being read at thumbnails. I personally don't think it's as important as they want to think it is, but that's why titles are so big on covers right now, is because of how Amazon displays small thumbnails at the bottom. It's called the also bots. Also bots are very important.
Okay.
You'll notice them when you're scrolling, look up a book, and at the bottom, So one row is sponsored ads, and one row is also bots, which is working off of Amazon's algorithm. And this is where this marketing stuff kind of comes in handy because, like, I look at that stuff. I don't know if all designers even really know that. Authors need to look at that stuff, and good indie authors are great marketers.
Now, are those bots scraping the text on the, you know, people also bought these books, or are they looking at the images?
They're doing what their buying history is. So it's an algorithm that's based on the buying history. Mm-hmm. So this is going to bring up probably the most important part of especially indie book design, but I would say all book cover design, genre rules. Genre, like just like Jan saying Marsha Brady. Like if you learn one thing about book cover design, and I'm going to say this as photographers, it's genre. If I was a photographer looking to get into this career, I'd do it the same way I did book cover design, which I'd research it first, like what's the viability? But I would go, so I only work with royalty free, and I know that you promote mainly rights managed stuff, which is not something I'm overly familiar with, which is why I joined the group, because I wanted to learn more about it. I would assume that it's mainly publishers that buy those images because they have the capital to do so.
Right.
Or buy the licensing rights to the images. I would go to the 5 big publishers. You've got, you know, Simon & Schuster, Penguin, Random House. I'd look up the big 5. I'd go to their sites and look at what photos they buy.
Yep. So that's actually it's a part of our lesson
Yeah.
in my course Uncovered, where you're actually going through the catalogs and you're looking at what has sold for the previous seasons and what is going to be hitting shelves in the upcoming seasons.
Yeah.
That's a huge way to find out what you should be shooting and the trends in various genres.
Yep.
Because paranormal romance, like that was huge around the time of Twilight. It started to die down. Now you might still see it on shelves because there might be books that bookstores are still buying. But
Right.
if you're not seeing publishers buying those images, then that's going to tell you something.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm on the indie side.
Mm-hmm.
And indie authors don't dictate genre design. They mimic it.
Right.
Publishers can dictate it. So you guys, photographers who are working with publishers, can be a little bit more on the cutting edge. You can be. If I was trying to make money, I probably wouldn't be on the cutting edge, but that's me. Like I'd be squarely in the middle.
Right.
But with indie authors don't have the budget to dictate design. So if you're going to do something that's off genre, and some big publishers will, they have a huge marketing budget and team and talk shows. They can push that book, therefore that design, and shift what a genre looks like. Indies don't. So I am constantly mimicking genres. And there's a reason, like people are like, well, you know, I want to be different. A lot of authors say this first thing, new authors. I want a book cover that looks different. No, you don't. And the reason you don't want it to look too different, there are tricks you can do to make it stand out, but you don't want it to look too different because let's say I love reading about space operas. Space opera is the only genre I read. Let's just pretend that. I know what a space opera book cover looks like. It has a big planet and a big spaceship. That's what they all look like. And that's, as a reader of that genre, that's what's going to attract my eye. That's who your audience is, right? So if I, like you mentioned, paranormal romance, there's certain color palette with paranormal romance. It's the blues or the reds, but generally the blues, and high contrast.
Yep.
And if I like paranormal romance, if that's the only thing I read, you want me to read your book. That means 6 seconds, 3 seconds, I have to recognize that cover as the genre I love immediately.
Yep. And I think for photographers, a big takeaway for this is, on one hand, a designer can manipulate an image however they want. Once the rights have been purchased, it's theirs to do with what they will. However, you could help a designer out by creating those color palettes. Like if you're shooting specifically for paranormal romance, then mimic the covers that are being used in that genre so that when a publisher or a book cover designer is scanning through a library, they're going to be able to pick it out immediately. I want to quickly jump back. Christina asked, is it worth approaching the businesses that are well known for permission to use their products, or is it better to go with more generic? You're probably not going to get permission from Harley Davidson or Tesla to use their designs in an image. So I would go with more generic wherever you can. If you can just, Photoshop out a logo and it's not going to be an iconic product, you're good. But if it is an iconic product, you're probably going to have a lot of issue trying to get permission. So generic where you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, back to genre. I think that the point that you made about authors wanting to be different, I think a lot of photographers, we want to be different too. And what's really interesting is that sometimes it sells and sometimes it doesn't. Like I've had some weird images sell for book covers. Like some of my weirdest fine art has sold, which makes me very happy. But it's also not my best selling collection, as it were.
Right.
And so sometimes, again, when we talk about separating our commercial from our fine art, yes, you can submit fine art to license, but at the same time, if you're trying to create for volume and for a living, then mimicking genre is so important. Put your voice and your stamp on it, absolutely, but looking at what other successful photographers are doing, it's so important. That's why when I go into bookstores, I'm always looking at the back to see who the photographer was and who licensed it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, have a spectrum. Like that's why I love my pre-made stuff. Yeah. That's my vision. And sometimes, I try to obviously work within certain genres, but sometimes I have an idea in my head I just need to get out, and I do it. Yeah. And sometimes it sells. Now, I don't follow that book cover to see how well it does in the marketplace. So like there's layers there, right?
Yeah.
So for me, my job as a designer, especially with my pre-made site, is to make something sexy and attractive to an author to buy.
Right.
Now, hopefully, I want that to do well in the marketplace so that author comes back, or people go, who designed that book? That's great, because they see it everywhere. So of course I want it to do well in the marketplace. But my first goal is to make it sexy for the author, because that's my consumer. The reader is not my consumer. Now, eventually it is down the line, sort of like with photographers. You know, the art director is your audience. Now, the art director is keeping in mind they need to sell it to a reader. So you need to keep the reader in mind too.
Yeah.
So there's like layers of who is really your audience when you're trying to sell something.
Yeah, and I think that what's really interesting about the indie market is that it's the author dictating so much when you're doing the custom work, whereas on the rights managed side for traditional publishers, oftentimes the author isn't given a lot of artistic license with their cover. It's really the designer and the publisher, because authors are not graphic designers. Like, they may be able to pick between, you know, one thing and another, but it's not going to be their say at all. So I'm just going to refresh my Facebook over here to see the other question that came in, to see whose name it is. Guys, the API will eventually be fixed so that I won't have to do this. Sarah says that's great input about shooting for genre and trying not to stand out too much, and it makes a lot of sense how you said it. And the thing that I really liked about what you said, Mariah, too, to kind of jump off of what Sarah is saying, is that I like that idea of a mix, right? So like, create the work that you want to create, see if it's marketable, and also create for the market so that you have that nice mix in your portfolio. And what's interesting to me too is that like different countries will take different paths. So one thing that I recommend in my courses is to take a look at like Archangel's Pinterest, because they often will pin their images based on country. And if we're in the United States, we don't have often the opportunity to go to bookstores in France. So it's a great way to see, well, what does the French market look like versus the US market? I tend to sell a lot in France, which means that my royalties tend to be smaller than in the US, but at the same time, they seem to take more creative risks. So I definitely like that too.
Yeah.
So you've actually answered some of my other questions while we've been talking, but I wanted to touch a little bit more on this because we sort of mentioned it a little bit before. So the process of working with an author to create a cover, because I think that this will help everybody understand not just the indie market, but also the traditional publishing market, even though authors have less say in the final product.
Even if you're not in the indie market, someone's dictating something, right? You're working with an art director, an editor, marketing head. You're working with someone. It's not completely your vision. I think that's probably one of the most important things to recognize as a creative provider. Creative provider is that you're going to be working with someone. So being open to compromise is important. For me, how it starts is I have a form on my website when they order. Asks genre, because that's the most important. And I like it if I can get subgenres for them. You know, it's not just romance, it's clean romance, it's historical romance, or hot and steamy. You know, there's a whole group there within that big thing. And mystery, actually. Mystery is huge. You've got your psychological thrillers, which are very different than your more action adventure detective.
Political,
or your political covers, right? Who's the audience, male, female? Like, there's some interesting things there. So the first thing I ask is genre. And then I also want an artist to submit, an author to submit either a Pinterest or even a couple of links to Amazon of book covers they like, preferably in the same genre, but not necessarily. The reason I do that, I get to get a feel as to who they are. What sort of things do they like? And if I can get 10 or 20 examples, I start to see, oh, they like big titles. Oh, they like small titles. Oh, all of these images use the color green. I start to assess things that they may have never even noticed. But that's like what I'm taking in. So I have a better chance of success when I send them that first proof. You know, I mean, this is a business. So I don't want to say as little time as I can spend on a project, but you know, I need to be aware of the time I spend on something. You know, so if it can go through as few revision processes as possible, that's good. That's
It probably makes both of you happy when it's done quicker, because they want to publish sooner rather than later too. Yeah.
So their examples help me assess their aesthetic values. The genre helps me start to research, what does a genre look like? So sometimes I get a job for a genre I haven't designed for, which is always for me really exciting. And I start my research. So my research involves glancing at Amazon, but Amazon has so much keyword stuffing, it can be really hard, especially if you're new to researching covers, to accurately assess that.
Yeah, so just for anybody that's not a marketer, keyword stuffing is when you put in, it's like when you see a lot of irrelevant hashtags on Instagram, it's basically their way of trying to game the search engine to show up for more things, even if they're not totally relevant. And it's an old bad practice in marketing that has leaked over into Amazon.
Yep.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's important. I get jargony. So, and miscategorization is a big thing in Amazon. And so you kind of have to be careful when doing your research. I'll do my first glance over there, but I won't study it. I go to Goodreads a lot and I look at their list. Now, unfortunately, their images are really small, so then I have to go back and look it up in Amazon. But, they'll be super specific. You can look up a list on Goodreads that's like female villains, female vampires, something that's a little more specific than you can on Amazon. And people have curated those lists and really dig down deep. And I like doing that. I like doing kind of this overview, and then I like digging down deep. And I'll look, if it's a new to me genre, I'll look at 100 covers easily just to start trying to figure out the design tropes of it. And then I also go to the main publishing site. So for me, my personal goal as a designer is to make my authors look like they were published by a big publishing house.
That's great.
So they don't have the stigma of being self-published. Not all designers have that.
Yeah, and there isn't as much of a stigma anymore, but in the beginning, there definitely was a huge stigma around self-publishing. Yeah. Sarah Davies asked, how do you get in the indie market, especially in pre-made designs? Do you have your own website dedicated to selling covers? Yes, she does. It's mariahsinclair.com. And then the Cover Vault is her pre-made site. And how do authors find you? That's a great marketing question. And I think that Mariah and I could probably geek out on this for the next 20 minutes and take up the rest of the time.
Really quick, Facebook groups have been really good to me. And so much that I got really lazy with my marketing, actually. And now I'm having to like pick up the pieces again and actually make a real marketing plan, not just look at all these people on Facebook that want to use me. Because now over the last year, really the last 6 months, it's gotten insanely competitive with cover designers. Everyone's jumping into the pool who's opened up Photoshop, and they're selling a book cover for not a pre-made, like a custom book cover for $80. My price is like $300, $350.
They're not going to be able to stay in business that long unless they're cranking it out. Yeah. I
mean, not everyone's paying for all their own bills.
Right. That's a good point.
People are hobbyists, and like me, I am actually a single person who is paying for all my bills. So my pricing, and I live in America, so my pricing has to reflect my economic situation. Others don't have a different economic, so it allows them to have a different price point, but it affects my bottom line. So Facebook has gotten so competitive. I was able to build a group. I think I'm at 770 people right now, I think, which is awesome. And that's been in about a year. And a lot of work comes from that, especially for my pre-mades. Custom work has been a little bit more of a struggle lately, if I'm completely honest. I'm being honest with you guys. I don't necessarily announce that to like all the fellow designers because it's like blood in the water, right? But so I'm working on a marketing plan that's going to focus kind of back to what I did with working with writers groups, regional writers groups, and going that area, because the authors on Facebook are an educated group. They are generally in there as a business to make money, so they're going to buy the cheapest cover they can, right? They know how to assess cover quality sometimes a little better. And so I'm looking at offering something that's a little bit more hand-holding to people that aren't necessarily heavily involved in Facebook. And so I'm kind of going to try to jump out of the competitive area. Remember the stat, 3,000 to 5,000 books are still published every day.
So it's still a huge market to serve. Yeah,
it is. Just that using that funnel of Facebook has gotten more competitive with other designers. So now it's like, where can I go find my authors where I'm not standing with 50 other designers? Right. So that's how I think as a marketer. Like, okay, the market's solid, but my audience, I need to find some other places to find my audience. And so that's, you know, and you guys are creatives too. That's how I look at things. Like, instead of trying to, I mean, I look at it like, instead of trying to find people to buy my stuff, I try to create stuff that people want to buy and go and find those people. Right. And that's how my whole pre-made site started. In fact, I'm known now as the Cozy Queen, which is for cozy mysteries, and they're illustrated covers for the most part. The only reason, like, no one made pre-mades for that, because even the authors said, no, pre-mades wouldn't work. Our stories are too specific. You can't, you know, nope. And the market, the traditional knowledge with pre-mades was that people were buying them after they wrote the story. So the designs had to be pretty generic.
Right.
But I loved the puns of cozies. Their titles are hilarious. And I was like, I want to create for this. So I started creating for it. And what I did was I created a market where 80% of my books that are bought before the story's written. People really for my covers.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. Like, it's such an honor, you know, to be a part of that. But that's how I twisted that market, you know, is I created specific covers, and I'm just getting authors before they write them instead of after.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, unfortunately, we can't do in the rights managed world. I wish they could. Yeah. Somebody says, I've heard of them, meaning the Cozy Mysteries. I'm going to check and see who that was. So those were illustrated covers, but when you have to create either for pre-made or for custom, what are you looking for in a photograph?
So I think emotion is really important. So we talked about genre. The second thing that's important in a book cover is that it accurately conveys the tone. So an author needs to know what their tone is, right? So is this a story about hope? Is it a story about despair? Is it a story about love? Is it a story that's lighthearted? Or is it a story that's very, pulls at the heartstrings? So that's the other question I ask when working with the author. What one word do you want to express in this image? That one word is then what I go and look for in imagery. Okay. So genre drives that, but emotion drives that a lot too.
Okay.
So, you know, if I'm doing something that's women's lit, that's happy story about sisters on vacation, I want to get people with smiles or at least, you know, colors that are a little brighter. And of course I can change that in the after fact. So I'm looking at something that might be neutral if I'm going to add a lot of blues and pinks to it. One of the things that I think a lot of photographers don't realize from my perspective as a designer, I don't like heavy crops. I'll do that. So you
don't like this? Oh God. I shoot a lot of that.
I know. And rights managed may be different. I'm not sure, you know, but I can do that. And I, as a designer for 25 years, I can see the potential in your image. I don't need you to do that. And sometimes I need that space for trim and bleed and cutting, you know, like it really limits me if I've got things cut off here.
Yeah.
Because I can't, maybe I need to blend it with something. So I need her hairline there so I can blend it into the castle for a bi-split cover, you know? So a lot of times I will knock an image because if I know I'm going to blend it into a castle, like it may still end right here, but I need a hairline to kind of drift into the environment. I won't use that image.
So this is a really interesting thing because some of us have talked about the size requirements, especially like with rights managed. And so this is why having a camera that can output a large image is so important, because I've also had images that have been cropped into. I also do shoot like this crop a lot because it sells well. But in the case of you, if you wanted to crop in, but then the image was actually too small to have that resolution that you would need, especially for a printed cover, then that would create a problem. So I like to say, use the camera that you have. A lot of times, even phone cameras have a high enough resolution. But one of the great things is that like the higher end Canons and Nikons and Sonys will create a large enough image that if a designer did need to crop in and only use a quarter of that image, they're not going to have to lose the quality in the design.
Right. And I do look at how big an image is. Like if I know, especially for like a landscape, if I'm going to use a full wrap of a castle or even just a beach scene or something, and I know I'm going to want it, it has to be, 13 inches across at the minimum. And that's without me cropping it. Yep. And that's for it to be a full wrap. And so for my landscapes, I will look at that. I'll check out what the largest sizes I can get from the stock site to make sure it's going to fit. Now, there is some fudging you can do, and I do a lot of overpainting and stuff, so that covers up a lot of low resolution issues. Yeah. But I like knowing that going into it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't want an image to dictate my design.
No.
Crops do that, low resolution does that, or smaller images do that. Like that starts limiting my creativity or even my flexibility. If an author says, oh, can we make that beach scene go across the whole thing? No, we can't. That's too small. Now, a beach scene's easy because you can flip it and merge it, whatever. But let's say it's a castle. Can we make the castle go all the way across? Nope.
Yeah.
It doesn't support that.
You made a good point about props dictating whether or not it can be used. I've had props actually photoshopped out of covers. Like I had a cover in Canada where I had the model holding a key, and the key got photoshopped out of her hand. Which was great that they used it and still got rid of the prop. But are there specific props that you see that are just utilized way too much that you just never want to see again?
I don't really think like that. Like I see a prop. I mean, this is just back to the genre stuff. Like I don't have a need to be super different. I want to look the best. Like there's a great line. There's a great line in one of the other designers' websites, and it's something first fit in, then stand out.
Right.
And so it's a lot like high school cliques,
Oh God, not high school again.
But it's that same mentality of like looking like all your friends, but maybe looking the best out of all of your friends.
There you go. Sarah Davies says she's been under the impression that authors' stories can be built around book cover images and rights managed as well, such as Archangel, and therefore we as photographers have a bit more creativity as far as creating characters. Is that not true? Would that sort of shooting be better to market independently to self-published authors? Well, you're asking two people that don't have a lot of crossover in terms of, I don't know Mariah's market, and she hasn't worked much in rights managed. I think that what happens, and I could be wrong because I'm not a book publisher, but what I'm hearing from like Mariah's experience is that there are times where an author has a very specific character in mind. And so you will try to find a character that resembles that to create the cover for no matter what the market is.
Yeah, so that's like probably my biggest nightmare. Indie author decides to write a romance book. This generally happens in romance based on a celebrity. So my character, he looks a lot like Ryan Reynolds. I can't, there's not a picture of Ryan Reynolds that I can use for commercial work on stock sites.
No.
And sometimes like Deposit Photos has editorial only photos. Right. And so an author will go on those sites and go, no, there's a Ryan Reynolds picture here of him at a movie premiere or something. And I'm like, no, that's just for magazines. I can't use that book cover. So that can get really confusing with novices that don't really know. So my biggest nightmare is when they are so hard set on it looking a certain way, generally a celebrity, and I can't do that. Right. So in my writers presentation that I give to writers groups, I tell them, use stock images for your inspiration. Go to the stock site. So that's pretty much what she's mentioning in the question is I tell writers before their book, when they're creating their little portfolio of characters, and a lot of authors do that. They print out pictures, they make vision boards, they get a lot of visuals while they're writing the book. Go to the stock site. You know, if you know you want a redhead female for your character, there's like 50,000 pictures of redheads. And it's an example I show in my presentation of like 100 pictures of a female redhead. Print that out. You don't have to buy it. Use the low res one. It's just inspiration. Then send me that link when I'm ready to do the book cover, and then you have a match.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly don't know if authors in the traditional world do that, but I would imagine that they probably do. Maybe not on stock sites, but just even looking at Google Images, looking for redheads, and then they find the one and they become their muse. All right, we have another question here. I just have to reload on Facebook to see who that is. So Sarah says, it's good to hear about the cropping thoughts. I've wondered about this. I tend to want to crop in partly because my camera is a dinosaur, haha, but hoping to upgrade this year to improve my options. So Sarah, I started doing my work on a Canon 30D, and most of the work that's in my portfolios was built around that. And that is a very, I think like maybe 8-megapixel camera. It was released in 2005, so definitely a dinosaur. Yeah, definitely. And it was secondhand too. Like somebody gave it to me. It was like their backup of their backup, and they're like, here, I don't need this anymore. So yeah, obviously, if you can upgrade, do it when you can. I upgraded because my income from photography allowed me to do so. And I've upgraded twice since then. So I have the Canon D and then the Canon D Mark II. But you know, it always feels better when you can pay for it with the money that you're earning from photography. But to me, it's about the vision, and then the tools are secondary. As long as you're creating an image that's large enough, then go for it. Right. And you know, if like Mariah says that designers don't like cropping in, then you know you can create different iterations of the same idea and submit that. One of the things that I'm talking about in the weekly licensing challenge is you don't want to create too many similars, but at the same time, you know, if you give an agency 10 different images that are similar-ish, they're going to pick the ones that they think are the most saleable, and you're going to learn from that experience. And if they tend to pick the ones that are not cropped in, then you're going to be like, aha, I know this now. For me, Trevelyan tends to pick, unless it's my fine art images, they pick images that are like cropped here or here. And so I create that. And so for everybody that's been seeing me behind the scenes, you're probably like, she does the same freaking thing every single time. Well, that's because that's what sells really well for me. And that's when Trevelyan accepts my stuff. That's what they're accepting. So
and you need to develop your own brand. Like I didn't expect to become the cozy queen. I just wanted to make a few. But it ended up working for me. And now I've made over 300 covers for that. Like that's what I'm known as. And, you know, this last month, I did 90 pre-mades. I did kind of a personal marathon for myself. I went through 90 pre-mades in 3 weeks, and I did it. Actually, the goal was 100. I only did 90. I petered out at the end. And you just don't know when you're going to hit that wall. Like you have your goal, and I hit it at 90. Yeah. But it was all like mystery and thriller because I wanted to move more into that genre. And I shouldn't say that. Half of it was cozies because that's what sells and I have to pay rent. And then half of it was me moving into a new genre, and I didn't know if they were going to sell, which was some darker stuff. I did horror. So here, my cozy audience with their cute little illustrations. If you go to thecovervault.com, and it is thecovervault.com, you'll see one. I did a Hear No Evil, See No Evil, Speak No Evil threesome. That is incredibly dark, like scary. It's scary. So here I am, like just showing all of these like really dark things, but that's how you branch into new genres is you just do it. You know, it hasn't sold yet. I'm okay with it. It's gotten a lot of positive feedback. It needs to find the right author. I don't work in that audience a lot. I don't have a horror audience right now. I need to probably do about 50 more covers in horror to get a horror audience. And I'm okay with that. Like I may go down that. It's a nice balance to cozies.
Yeah, I don't see it. Oh, maybe I have to go into horror right here. I'm on thecovervault.com. Oh yeah, that is creepy. Ooh, it just gave me chills. Very nice design. That is terrifying.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
So you can imagine my cozy audience with all my
gosh. Yeah. Yeah. They're going to have to close out of it really quickly. Christina says, going back to the talk about tools, she says, I've discovered I love my Canon D80, also secondhand because of the rich colors. And I also have an upgraded camera that I use on a consistent basis for my business. But if I need a specific feeling of colors, I'll grab my other. That's really interesting. I do notice that my 30D also has like a very specific output too. But I tend to find that the colors come more from my lenses than the sensor and the camera. So I'd be curious to kind of like see if you were to take the same photo with one body and another, what would happen?
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone an hour. I have 2 more questions for you. And I think that they're some of the most important questions. First one, and we've touched on this a little bit, but this is going to be a great recap. To you, what makes a marketable cover, and how much does the photograph or the illustration play into it versus the design and the treatment?
Mm-hmm. So, genre matching is the first thing. Does it fit the genre, whatever that is? And then number 2, does it evoke the right tone and emotion? And I think that has a huge amount to do with the imagery. Your emotion comes from the imagery. It's not going to come from the typography for the most part. And it's not going to, the words might show the emotion. Like if I have it say remembering, it might be, but they're going to probably see the colors and the content first before the word. Right? So you need to evoke that emotion. And if I was a photographer, I mean, I haven't ever sold photography, so I don't know. But if I was to like grab a camera and try to do this, I would try to have very emotive photos, whether that's happiness, whether that's sadness, whether it's contemplation. But especially if it's of a person, I want to see, or even the objects, those old shoes on that luggage. Like I felt a ton of emotion with that photo that you posted yesterday, you know, and I was like, yeah, I want to put that on a book cover. Like when I see an image that inspires me, and that's how my pre-mades work. I don't search for images for pre-mades. I have a collection of images that have attracted me, and I just collect them as I'm searching for custom stuff. And it's because I saw an emotion in the image. Like it struck me, and I was like, ooh, there's some good, that looks like something sad. Okay, I'm going to create something, or she's really mysterious. I like that. You can see there's something going on in that woman's eyes.
Yeah. So to me, what I'm hearing is that figuring out your genre and then creating images that are evocative, that also match the genre, are going to help telegraph the author's intent to the reader so that they understand immediately. We want to categorize as humans, so they understand immediately what is the category that they're looking at, whether it's on a shelf or on Amazon or Kindle.
Yeah. You know, not only do we like to categorize as humans, but we also know what we like, especially when you start reaching a certain age. Like, you know, you get old like me, you know what you like. Like, I know what I like to read. So I need a cover and an image that if I want to read something sad, which I'm going to be attracted to a cover that's sad. You know, and it's not, you know, like tears. It's not obvious. And this is where your creativity as photographers comes in. I'm not saying a girl crying. You have a very sad picture that doesn't even have a person in it. You know, but think in those terms, like, does this have emotion to it?
Creating that depth and that human experience is so important. Sarah says, love it. That's always my focus, the emotion. Christina says she'll try that. Another question that Sarah has and brings back to the pre-made conversation was, how many pre-mades did you start out with on your site when you began going in that direction? And did you have an audience already when you started that direction?
So I launched the Cover Vault in February. Prior to that, my pre-mades were on Mariah Sinclair.com, and they were essentially concept rejects, which is what a lot of people use. They were and they weren't close enough to the final. Like, that's something you have to judge. Right. They were very different than the final that the author ended up using, or they were, I'll be honest, most of them were rejects from 99 Designs. So a successful designer on 99 Designs only wins a third of their contests. That's how they rate someone who's really successful, is winning a third. So I had a lot that didn't win.
Mhm.
So those became my pre-mades initially. When I decided I really wanted this as a business, I think I had like 150 that I launched with.
Mhm.
And my role model for my pre-made business is another pre-made site called thecovercollection.com. Also,
Okay.
they have the word "the" in it. And I think they're really great for looking at genre too, because they nail mass market genre so well. And they have like 900, and that's my goal. But I have to be patient. It takes time, and this is a blessing and a curse. So I did those 90. I launched them Monday, and I make it a big deal when I do a mass release because I build it up for a couple of weeks. So I launched those 90. I sold 54%, which is amazing.
Yeah.
It also means I lost 54% of my inventory. So like
Right.
building up to this 900 and 1,000 designs take that much longer. So it's a blessing. I don't want to knock sales. Sales are amazing,
Right.
but it made it really hard for me to become a destination spot, which is my goal. I want other authors to promote that site, which is why I spun it off into a different name. Is, oh, I need a pre-made. Oh, you need to go to the Cover Vault.
Right. Right.
It's harder to build up that inventory when they're buying so much. Not knocking it. It is a blessing.
Yeah.
But the reality is I'm not going to make it to 900 within a few months.
Yeah. Yeah. The blessing and the curse of making money. I mean, for photographers, it would be like if you had 1,000 images in your rights managed portfolio and they could only be used once, and suddenly half of that inventory got sold. Maybe in 3 years, you could sell it again because a contract had expired. But then that means that unless you build up more of your inventory, you have that much less to sell. And then it means that it could limit further sales because there's just less to choose from. So that's why I talk about licensing is a numbers game.
Yeah.
Sounds like the Cover Vault is too.
Yeah, the pre-mades is a numbers game. There's a couple of numbers you need to look at. One, having a lot of something. The way I've chosen to do it is I focus on one genre and do a ton so I can attract that audience, and then I move on to another genre and I do a ton so I can attract that audience. Other people have done a few in each genre. I don't find that as effective. It's a longer pull doing this, but I'd much rather have people know me as the mystery person or as the cozy. I'm the cozy queen. People go to me for look at my site for cozies, and so I'm trying to do that one genre at a time, doing 100 in that genre. I forgot what I was saying, but having that exactly what you said. If you keep on running out of inventory, it takes a while to build this up. Oh, the numbers game. So the other numbers I look at, how quickly can I do a pre-made? So I like my pre-mades to be very economically priced. I've been a starving artist. I'm trying to provide a professional product to starving authors, if you will. And this is my low end price point, and I want to keep it that way. There are people that sell pre-mades for $200 and $300. That's not me. But that means I need to be very aware of how much time I spend on something. And so my cozies go really quick. I can't do a set of 4 cozies. There's a reason they're sell in series. I spend an hour on the first design, and then the other designs right after take 15 to 20 minutes each. So a series of 6, what's that, 2.5 hours? And that will sell for $330.
Yeah. I think that workflow piece that you're talking about is really great to translate into the photography side of it too, or any kind of visual arts that you're licensing, creating series. You don't want them to be too similar in that, you don't want to create market confusion, but being able to say like, if there came a series of like the girl with the dragon tattoo, and if you were the photographer for all of those covers, knowing that there is some sort of similarity in the character or the setting, things like that is super helpful. And then also what you're talking about in terms of almost like creating the setup for the design on the photography side of it. If you are creating a setup for a shoot and you're able to get a nice series out of it, that means that the more of that sells, the less the more you're being paid for your time, right? Because if every single image that we're putting on the market takes us 6 hours, 8 hours. Some of my fine art takes me 40 hours to create. Well, if I'm being paid $1,000 for those 40 hours for 5 years, because that's maybe the longest the contract would be, then my hourly rate becomes very small. And so finding that balance between, again, the fine art piece that's satisfying the artist and that commercial kind of got to crank it outside is so important. You know?
Yeah, I think, I guess that would probably be my hope that people would take away as being a creative, is to have a spectrum, have stuff that is going to make you money. If you desire to make money from this,
yes,
have stuff is commercial and is going to sell like hotcakes, and doesn't take a huge amount of time, or at least is balanced with your time income.
Yes.
And then have stuff that fulfills you creatively, that pushes boundaries so you can get known in the industry for doing stuff. That you can be a trendsetter. But have both until, if you become known for a certain trend, then by goodness, embrace it, hold on to that brand and go with it.
Yeah.
In
absolutely.
the meantime, make sure you've got the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great notes to end on. You've really kind of wrapped it up in a fantastic way. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your expertise. I think that there's a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to. So we will probably be both hopping on the thread to try to answer them more. Thank you, everybody that stuck around for the technical difficulties. Really appreciate it. And Mariah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you.
This has been fun. Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.